The coffee shop was nearly empty when Sarah arrived at 6:30 a.m. She chose a corner table, her back to the wall, remembering the anonymous email's instructions. Sunrise coffee, window seat, bring a USB drive. Her hands wrapped tightly around her cup as she watched the door. A woman in oversized sunglasses and a designer scarf slipped into the seat across from her. Without a word, she placed a sleek laptop on the table. "I'm Angela Thompson," she said quietly, removing her glasses. "Richard's soon-to-be ex-wife, and I have everything you need to bring him down." Sarah studied the elegant woman before her. Angela's perfectly manicured nails trembled slightly as she typed in a password. "Why are you helping us?" "Because Richard destroyed more than roads." Angela's voice cracked. "Our marriage ended when I discovered the offshore accounts. He threatened to ruin me if I talked. But last week," she paused, composing herself, "he started the same scheme in a retirement community. Those people will lose their savings to their homes." The laptop screen filled with documents, internal emails, bank statements, and photos of Richard with various officials in compromising situations. As Sarah's USB drive filled with evidence, her phone buzzed. A text from Tom. "Fire. Get back now." She arrived home to find her garage engulfed in flames. Fire trucks crowded the street as neighbors gathered on her lawn. Through the smoke, she spotted a familiar black SUV driving slowly past, Gregory Walsh watching from the passenger seat. But the HOA's intimidation backfired spectacularly. The fire made the local news, attracting the attention of Maya Chen and David Roberts, investigative journalists who'd been tracking similar HOA schemes across the state. They arrived at Sarah's temporary office, Tom's basement, with years of research and a network of sources. "You're not alone," Maya explained, spreading out case files. "We found identical patterns in 3 counties. Same inflated costs, same offshore accounts, same accidents happening to people who ask questions." David added, "What they didn't count on was someone like you, Sarah. Someone who knows how to follow the paper trail and isn't afraid to fight back." The coalition grew stronger each day. Angela's evidence helped them contact other HOA fraud victims. Mrs. Peterson's senior community connections brought in retired lawyers willing to help pro bono. Even the construction workers, unpaid for weeks, began sharing photos of falsified work orders. But Richard Thompson had one more card to play. Sarah received a courier delivery, documents showing her house would be foreclosed unless she paid fabricated HOA violation fines totaling $147,000, due in 48 hours. "They think this will stop us," Sarah told her allies, gathered in Tom's basement. "But they've given us exactly what we need, proof of extortion." Maya's eyes lit up. "And I know exactly when to use it. The HOA's annual gala is tomorrow night. Every corrupt official in Thompson's pocket will be there, along with state regulators and the press. Then that's where we'll be too," Sarah declared, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's time to show everyone who Richard Thompson really is." The grand ballroom of the Riverside Country Club sparkled with crystal chandeliers and artificial goodwill. Sarah adjusted her borrowed evening gown, courtesy of Angela, as she watched Richard Thompson work the room. He moved from one influential guest to another, champagne in hand, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. "Everything's ready," Maya whispered through Sarah's concealed earpiece. The investigative journalist was in the control room with the AV team, who'd been surprisingly eager to help after learning about Thompson's pattern of stiffing contractors. "Waiting for your signal." Sarah caught Angela's eye across the room. Thompson's ex-wife was stationed near the emergency exit, her designer clutch containing backup copies of every incriminating document. Tom and Mrs. Peterson had positioned themselves by other exits, each accompanied by FBI agents posing as their plus ones. Thompson tapped his glass, calling for attention. Distinguished guests, fellow community leaders. He began his rehearsed speech. "Tonight we celebrate excellence in neighborhood development. Now," Sarah commanded softly. The massive screens behind Thompson flickered. His professional headshot disappeared, replaced by security footage showing him accepting bribes in dimly lit parking lots. Bank statements materialized, showing the millions siphoned from HOA funds. Photos of damaged homes and corrupted officials filled the screens as Thompson's voice continued to drone about community values. The room fell silent. Thompson turned, his face draining of color as he watched his empire crumble in high definition. "This is lies. Slander," he shouted, but his voice cracked as email chains appeared, his own words damning him. "Guards, remove these screens." "They won't help you, Richard," Angela called out, her voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "Not this time." As if on cue, the security team moved, not to help Thompson, but to block the exits. Their FBI badges glinted under the chandeliers. State Attorney Monica Reeves, whom Thompson had been buttering up all evening, stood up from her table. "Richard Thompson," she announced formally, "you're under investigation for fraud, racketeering, and corruption." Thompson bolted for the kitchen. He made it 3 steps before slipping on his own spilled champagne, falling spectacularly into a dessert cart. The wedding cake intended for the evening celebration covered him in ironic justice. 1 week later, Sarah stood on her porch, watching as fresh gravel was laid on Oak Ridge Lane, properly this time, by a legitimate contractor. The FBI investigation had uncovered corruption in HOAs across 3 states. New legislation was already being drafted to protect private road owners. Mrs. Peterson walked over, carrying her signature lemon bars. "You know what this calls for." Sarah smiled. "The annual road maintenance barbecue." First of many, Tom called out, wheeling his grill down his driveway. "And this time, we've got quite a story to tell." As neighbors gathered, not just from Oak Ridge Lane, but from all the communities Thompson had threatened, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction. Their private road had stayed private, but their victory had become something bigger. A reminder that when regular people stand together, even the most powerful corruption can't pave over their rights. "You know," Maya said, joining Sarah with a notepad in hand, "this would make one hell of a story. Mind if I write it up?" Sarah watched children drawing hopscotch patterns in the fresh gravel. "Go ahead. People should know. Sometimes the best roads are the ones that stay exactly as they are." Sarah's dining room had transformed into a war room within 48 hours. Stacks of documents covered every surface. Her laptop displayed property records, and red string connected photos on a makeshift evidence board. Her former colleague, Marcus Chen, now a real estate attorney, sat across from her, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he examined yet another document. "There it is," Marcus muttered, tapping a line of text. Premium Paving Solutions isn't just the HOA's contractor. They're registered at the same address as Riverside Estates Management. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the screen. "The same Richard Thompson, whose HOA president is CEO of both companies." And that's not all. Marcus pulled up another window. "Every road improvement project they've done in the last 3 years has cost homeowners exactly $12,475 per household. That's triple the going rate, Sarah." A knock at the door made them both jump. It was Tom, clutching a brown envelope. "You need to see this," he said, his face ashen. "My brother works at First National. He risked his job to get me these records." The banking documents reveal the complex web of wire transfers. For every road project, exactly 60% of the funds disappeared into a maze of offshore accounts, eventually landing in a shell company called Community Infrastructure Holdings in the Cayman Islands. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed the county commissioner's office for the 3rd time that week. Once again, she was stonewalled. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, but all the proper permits were filed." The HOA's jurisdiction expansion was completely legal, but something about the commissioner's voice sounded strained. Sarah started digging into public records and found it. A $50,000 community development grant from Premium Paving Solutions to the commissioner's pet project, conveniently awarded just days before the road jurisdiction change was approved. That evening, as Sarah walked her dog along what remained of their gravel road, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. The driver quickly pulled away when she approached. Back home, her email inbox contained a cryptic message: "Drop this, or you'll regret it. Some roads are better left untraveled. Instead of frightening her, the threat crystallized Sarah's resolve. She called an emergency meeting with her neighbors in Tom's garage, safer than her now-watched house. As they gathered, Mrs. Peterson shuffled in last, clutching a surprising piece of evidence. "My late husband was an accountant," she said, pulling out a faded notebook. "He kept records of every road maintenance cost for 15 years. Look at the real prices compared to what the HOA is charging." The numbers were damning. But just as Sarah started to feel they were making progress, her phone buzzed with alarming news. The HOA had scheduled an emergency board meeting. The agenda's first item: immediate road construction implementation, all opposition to be overruled. They were running out of time. The autumn morning that changed everything started like any other on Oak Ridge Lane. Sarah Mitchell was savoring her coffee on the wraparound porch, watching golden leaves dance across the gravel road she'd helped maintain for 2 decades. The familiar crunch of her neighbor Tom's pickup truck making its way down the lane was replaced by an alien sound, the menacing growl of heavy machinery. Sarah nearly dropped her favorite ceramic mug as she watched a massive yellow excavator lumber around the bend, its metal teeth gleaming in the morning sun. Behind it, a convoy of construction vehicles formed a mechanical parade that seemed wildly out of place on their quiet private road. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Sarah called out, her voice barely carrying over the equipment's roar. She hadn't even changed out of her plaid robe and worn slippers, but dignity took a backseat to urgency as she hurried down her porch steps. A man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit emerged from a black SUV that had been following the construction convoy. His leather shoes, clearly not meant for gravel, crunched purposefully as he approached. The smile he wore seemed practiced, almost predatory. "Mrs. Mitchell, I presume?" He extended a manicured hand, which Sarah pointedly ignored. "I'm Gregory Walsh, legal representative for the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. I have some documents you'll want to see." Sarah's hands trembled as she scanned the papers he thrust toward her. "This is ridiculous. This road has been private property since 1978. We have a maintenance agreement between all 4 households." "Had an agreement," Walsh corrected smoothly. "As of 7 a.m. this morning, Oak Ridge Lane falls under HOA jurisdiction. We're upgrading it to meet our community standards." The excavator's bucket bit into the gravel nearby, and Sarah flinched at the sound. Her neighbors began emerging from their homes, Tom with his coffee still in hand, elderly Mrs. Peterson clutching her small dog, and the Williams family still in their pajamas. "You can't just show up and start destroying our road." Tom's voice boomed across the chaos. Walsh's smile never wavered. "Actually, we can. Everything's been properly filed with the county. You'll all be receiving welcome packets to the Riverside Estates HOA, including your first month's due statement and a special assessment for these necessary improvements." Sarah watched in horror as more equipment arrived. Dump trucks, graders, and a roller that could easily flatten their peaceful way of life. But something about Walsh's confidence felt off. The way he kept glancing at his phone, the slight tremor in his hand as he held out the documents. "This isn't over," Sarah declared, pulling her robe tighter and straightening her spine. "Not by a long shot." Walsh's smile finally faltered, just for a moment. "Mrs. Mitchell, I strongly advise against making this difficult. The HOA has considerable resources, and we're simply bringing your road up to code." But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was already dialing her old colleague from her paralegal days. If the HOA wanted a fight, they'd picked the wrong road and the wrong woman to bully.